Hi, it's Conor Svensson here, founder and CEO of Web3 Labs. This is a conversation I had with Peter Broadhurst. Peter is the co-founder and head of engineering at Kaleido. Kaleido is a full-stack enterprise blockchain as a service platform. Previously, Peter worked for IBM for 18 years, where he worked on cloud computing and middleware technologies. In our conversation, we discuss the problems that blockchain solves that middleware couldn't, and where he sees the big opportunities for blockchain in enterprise. We also cover the newly launched Firefly project, which Peter is very involved in. Firefly provides a multi-party system for enterprise data flows, which lets developers build decentralized enterprise-grade applications on blockchain-based business networks. Like myself, Peter is a technologist at heart, and it was fun to geek out on how blockchain fits into the broader technology landscape. Peter, great to have you here.
Hi Connor, great to be here.
So, you've been involved in blockchain as one of the co-founders at Collido for a number of years, but prior to that, you're at IBM for 18 years, if I have that right. And from what I understand, you're working on cloud computing and middleware. So I'd love to hear about how you, well, really what you did at IBM and how that ultimately transitioned into blockchain technology.
Yes, I guess it's interesting for me because when you look at the technologies that I was working on throughout my career, there's a huge overlap with what blockchain's trying to achieve, particularly in the enterprise space. I started at the beginning of my career working on a technology called MQ, MQ series it was in IBM, and it was one of the original sort of game-changing technologies for how different companies could do cross-organization transaction processing. And it was just a messaging system fundamentally, but it was reliable. So you could send something and know it was going to get there. It sparked a huge wave of these technologies that were about a different way to communicate. And we've all heard of ActiveMQ and RabbitMQ and these other technologies as well. So that's where I started, and it's amazing how similar that is to sort of where I'm back to now in the blockchain space, trying to solve a similar problem. And sort of as I went through my career, I got very involved in the application server stack and the transaction processing there, the WebSphere stack there, and also on the integration side. So how the core systems of enterprise could integrate together. And I did a lot of my time actually in the support side, working on other people's code, rather than actually net new developments. Quite a lot of, I got to see the whole stack inside and out, which was a really sort of nice journey to be on there, and a lot of work with customers in the last few years at IBM, actually traveling, working with customers, sticky projects, complicated things that need to be designed, sort of actually being out there, seeing the kinds of business problems that people are trying to solve with these integration technologies between organizations.
And so you say about I guess the similarities with blockchain, and I mean, you know, there's been that kind of argument historically with middleware technologies, how they can be used in an enterprise and they could potentially span multiple business units, but there's kind of a point where it makes sense for a large organization to be working with, you know, middleware technologies, and then there's a point where potentially they could actually want to, you know, look at blockchain, even for actually connecting multiple subsidiaries of a single organization without actually thinking about the external connectivity. Is there kind of a point there where you feel, you know, it's where the natural jump becomes to blockchain, or you know, what are your views there?
Yeah, absolutely. Blockchain does something that was impossible throughout my career, was absolutely impossible. Um, every previous generation of how organizations work together, before the sort of, we tend to refer to it now as a multi-party system, this new thing enabled by blockchain tech. Every previous generation was, I have my source of truth, you have your source of truth, and we're doing some kind of ping pong exchange, whether it's SOAP web services or REST or messaging. We aren't agreed on a source of truth. We're exchanging information from two different sources of truth. And suddenly with blockchain, if you build a multi-party system that's got a blockchain in the middle, there are it's game changing because you can have a shared source of truth with other organizations, and you don't have to trust them to trust the source of truth. Um, and that means that a network of businesses which are cooperating and competing, this sort of competition, can work together and have certain agreed truths, such as sequences of events, or in tokens, total conservation of value, or uniqueness of one particular reference ID in the world that we're all using for the same thing. And those really base constructs completely change the kinds of problems that you can solve and get away. We used to call it this compensation logic. It's so complicated. Like, I said this to you, you said that to me, it all happened at the same time, we end up with different results. How do we sort out the mess? And sorting out that mess with people involved in business processes could have taken weeks in the past, in real world scenarios. And with a multi-party system, if you can get it right and you can get the balance, the right things to be the shared data, and you still get the privacy side of it right, then you can take those sort of weeks and just have agreement immediately. Agreement that no one would bother to challenge because there's an audit record that's just so clear. But you don't have the sort of where's my message problem of, like, did I say that first? Did you say that first? I think I said it, but you didn't confirm. Does that mean you didn't? Like, all of that goes away with blockchain, which is fantastic.
And is this something that you recognized when you were still working at IBM, or is it more something that you've kind of, developed a real, I guess, narrative around as you've, spoken more and more with customers working actually with blockchain technology?
That's a great question. But blockchain was the exciting new thing that was happening in enterprise IT for a few years while I was still at IBM. So it would be the water cooler conversation, right? Would be with the person who's just gone to the blockchain team to build blockchain stuff because it's fun and new and interesting. And so I think that excitement was certainly there for me. That the possibility, it just seemed to me like this was the first technology that could change the core of businesses rather than the outside. Right? It could actually change the way business core transactions happen. It wasn't just about sort of surrounding and connecting stuff. It was actually about changing the core way that an end-to-end business transaction happens. And that means for enterprise IT, it's huge. The potential that nascent, still nascent, honestly, potential for cross-industry revolution on how sort of business gets done. I think it's kind of a unique technology from that perspective. So yeah, that was why it was so exciting to kind of launch into Kaleido out of that, was because it just felt like this could really change things in a meaningful way, and really make things better as well, because another side of blockchain is that it increases the transparency. It can increase the trust that users of systems can have in the systems themselves. That organizations start to work together in new and interesting ways, which are more open, more collaborative. They're building, business ecosystems rather than completely centering in one business. And that's really exciting for lots of different reasons. Not just what it can do for the big enterprises themselves, but actually what it can do for us all in terms of systems working better for people.
And that's something I think about it in terms of, businesses almost turn themselves inside out when they're engaging, making use of the DLT, because although there is, of course, privacy considerations, you're not making available all sensitive information, but it's like how the processes can actually run in that sort of collaborative environment there. And do you
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
about there being sort of parallels though with certainly with projects like the Baseline Protocol, for instance. They talk about this notion of blockchain can almost be used like a middleware technology between these different organizations. Now, the fact that you've got this kind of layer of programmability that can happen at the protocol layer, is one of the distinguishing features with blockchain. But do you think there are kind of parallels in that regard as well?
Well, yes, and I guess we've been on the journey throughout Kaleido the last few years, seeing how real projects get to production on blockchain, and the reality, the cold hard reality is. It is a lot like middleware because these organizations aren't immediately going to be throwing away all of the core systems that exist inside of those businesses. So the only way that a blockchain ecosystem can be value to a business is if it integrates with the core the core systems that they use on a day-to-day basis. It's got to make their business better. In a meaningful way, and if it doesn't integrate, then it's probleming. It's a real problem. And what we've actually seen is that there's two things that matter hugely when you're going about one of these projects, and the first is getting the use case right, so that you can demonstrate real value that is valuable to the players in the system. And the second is being able to take the skills that exist across those organizations, rather than just the skill that exists in some central specialist team that understands, blockchain protocols and zero knowledge proofs and baseline and all of these low-level technologies. You need to be able to engage the integration teams, the data engineers, the application builders, and you need to be able to, and this is the really key point, get to a proof of value quickly. Because I think the fact that it is a lot like middleware, it doesn't do anything on its own. Middleware, the thing about middleware that's been true throughout my career, you're working on the plumbing. The bit that doesn't deliver any value in its own right. It's hugely valuable, but on its own, it doesn't generate the value. It's a tool that allows use cases to be built on top of it. So what's the most important thing about a piece of middleware? How quickly it enables developers, and for blockchain, ecosystems of developers, to build solutions. That's like the most important value that it has. How sophisticated and clever it is inside is really useful, and the subtle differences between the blockchain technologies, the different ways that you can use them. That's great. But really, what do business ecosystems need? They need proven patterns that have worked elsewhere, just made available to them, sort of as middleware, so they can build applications on top. And we've been astonished looking over the last few years and sort of coming to projects that have been going a while and that we've been helping with, and building projects from scratch. Just how much kind of rebuild of the plumbing is kind of the norm in projects. We try desperately to avoid it, right? That's just not, it's not where the value is coming out of. So you need to build on top of it. But we've seen incredible amounts of resource being used on just building the plumbing necessary to like have a blockchain network with everyone having the nodes, have the transaction streaming on, have the events coming off, have the private data integrated with the blockchain data. All of that stuff that isn't about, how do I actually build an application on top of it? Just taking ridiculous amounts, project years of time. And I think that more than anything, that's the thing that will allow the next wave of innovation, of production innovation on blockchain, is going to be projects just being able to iterate at the use case level rather than the plumbing level.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's certainly with what you say, it makes me think of a couple of things. Firstly, with the number of hackathons that have happened, where like the output of the hackathon is getting a blockchain up and running. But back in the earlier days, and also with enterprise architecture specifically, like I guess it's not had its sort of enterprise integration patterns moment where you've got kind of these really well defined kind of approaches for integrating these different types of solutions for this. One of the things though that you spoke about there as well was the actual use cases and having the importance of having the right use case too. What are the things that come to mind about what are the really good use cases here? It could be that you give specific examples, or it could be just more that calling out the properties that you feel very relevant.
Yeah, so I probably will give just more general answers,
Yeah.
but one of the things, and one of the journeys that led us to Firefly that it'd be great to talk about a little bit, where we're trying to take those patterns and make them really just in an open source way, rather than it just sort of being you come to a company like Kaleido, where every developer should be able to develop sort of to these use cases. What we've seen, I guess, maybe uniquely in our journey in Collido, or maybe not, is that we've seen lots of patterns that are cross industry beyond the core financial token ones.
Mm-hmm.
And just a few examples. One is around improving business processes, multi-party business processes. Um, Cases where it takes UPS trucks and planes flying around the world and physical documents exchanging to allow ships to leave ports or money to actually sort of close out at the end of some business transaction. Um, those kinds of use cases, the efficiency gains can be huge. So like improving the way an end-to-end business transaction works is one really critical one. Another one we've seen, which is really interesting, and we've seen across industry over and over again, is enterprises at their core are about the data that they have in terms of the IT landscape. And when you're trying to do something in a business ecosystem of any kind, everybody's got their own source of truth and their own internal amount of data on customers, data on transactions, data on products, data on things. And one of the biggest sticking points is that everybody is constantly spending time and effort trying to make their data consistent and correct, and make their data consistent and correct with everyone else in the business ecosystem. And they do that because there's no way for them to share data. And this is as true as it is for healthcare data, as it is for insurance data, as it is for core sensitive cross-government department data. They have strong regulations that mean they have to be really careful about how they share data with each other. But they actually want to share the data with each other in certain scenarios because they also have requirements that mean they should be, they must be able to agree on certain core things.
Yeah.
I give a specific example that might sort of bring it home, which is one you can read about from a really fantastic organisation that called Rishstream, which is part of the Institutes. It's one of the biggest groups of insurance organisations in the US. And they have a use case around what they call mortality monitor. And this problem that all of the insurance companies need to pay out to people in the case of a bereavement.
Yeah.
And the poor people who are dealing with that, which is incredibly hard for the actual people who are dealing with that bereavement, are asked to provide data, the same data, tens of times during the process, because those individual insurance companies actually being able to share that information is really tough. And that delays payout of the the actual insurance to the bereaved, and it just causes a huge amount of human suffering, right? In terms of having to go through that to actually prove that somebody has passed away, and like that problem, amazingly, can be solved using blockchain at the core in a way that it couldn't have been solved before. So there were use cases that are just like a world away from here's an STO issuance, or I've got an NFT of a fantastic football player that I want to put out there on the web. There's use cases that are just hugely detached from them, but the core constructs of uniqueness, things like tokenization to help the ecosystem work, can just transform the way it happens.
No, absolutely. So I know that you obviously want to talk about Firefly as well, and this is a recently, I guess, publicly announced project anyway within Hyperledger. It's obviously come out of the work that you've been doing over the number of years now at Kaleido. And so for those of people who are listening who aren't familiar with Kaleido, it's probably worth just introducing a bit more about who Kaleido are and what they do. But then I think talking about Firefly and why it's so exciting, why it's so relevant right now.
Yeah, that's great, Conor. Thanks. Yeah, Kaleido's a startup that's focused exclusively on this sort of problem of multi-party systems. So we're a specialist in the sort of blockchain space, and we focus on making this technology consumable for enterprise. So back at the beginning, we started with some of the problems which, as you pointed out, back then people were spending huge amounts of time on, like how do we get a network up and running? How do we get the right balance of decentralization and sovereignty, but and consistency to actually have everyone's got a blockchain node, right? What does that look like? What's the right balance of hosted and hybrid, etc. approaches to having a blockchain network up? And that's where we started. We launched on stage our public as a service offering with AWS there up on stage as we were the first managed service that they had, and continued to go on to partner with Microsoft as well, and provide as a service infrastructure. But immediately as soon as we'd done that, we actually started then building on top of that and building some of the services that were net new that didn't exist. One of the earlier services was how do you get transactions streaming onto a blockchain, how do you get events coming off, and then things like organization to organization, private encrypted data exchange, abstract messaging, large documents, building that sort of stack on top, and providing as a service a sort of solution stack for building enterprise applications. And we work directly with network operators and enterprise business networks, and we help all the way from the development of the application use cases, the decentralized app, and the end user experience and APIs, all the way through to providing that enterprise grade as a service infrastructure in the back end that allows this network to have the right, have their sovereign infrastructure connected back to their organization, but it also allows everyone to go fast enough that they can connect together. And that's why we also do focus a lot on providing as a service infrastructure still.
And so with these building blocks that you created, you started to see some common patterns emerging there, right? And some problems that you really felt that you were solving that were probably bigger than Kaleido itself.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, it's a big decision for an organization like ours that has a lot of unique insight in the space, to go and say, well, the thing we were going to do is we're going to take the crown jewels and we're going to make them available, right? That's a really big decision. And the reason why we felt it's just what blockchain needs is we were solving the same problems over and over again. And we had the tools on the truck to do it. But when you look at the blockchain sort of revolution and where it is, and you know, as it's encompassing more and more technologies, it's still not achieving the scale that it should be. It's not there yet. It's too hard for to build a blockchain solution. It's the patterns just aren't readily available, and we drew a number of parallels to a technology I love and saw evolve during my career of Docker.
Yeah.
And back at the beginning of Docker, there were people in the space who were like, this is going to change the world. Like, this is amazing. The way you can put any software in a box and make it consistent. This is just going to change the way everything runs. It's going to change HA models. But Docker on its own was brilliant on your laptop, but it didn't actually solve the problem. And people like me building cloud solutions were like, well, we need a whole layer on top. I built three generations of cloud services before I came to start Kaleido. And the first one, we built a whole orchestration layer ourselves. We built it. We used like HashiCorp console at the time and Zookeeper directly, and we built it all. Like we built the whole orchestration layer. And then the second generation, it was like, well, there was lots of orchestration layers you could pick between, and Marathon and the like. And then Kubernetes came along, and the game changed. No projects had to think about any of this stuff. There was just this brilliant API programming model and set of objects, and you just used it, and the patterns were there. And that piece of the project of how do I build the cloud infrastructure went away. And that is what we know. Like, we know that's what the blockchain industry needs. It's what innovators of decentralized multi-party systems need, is the technology to sort of become consumable for them. Not just consumable for the specialists inside of the blockchain space, consumable for them. And Firefly is our attempt to seed that, to try and start a community that's focused squarely on making the orchestration layer that makes all of these technologies fit together. And it embraces the fact that the blockchain's just one component. We see like 20 to 50 components inside of these projects. Lots of them are application components. Lots of them are off-chain. You've got to fit the stuff together, and that's what we're trying to do with Fireflies, is make it easy for the people who have to worry about everything, not just the people who are worried about the blockchain piece itself.
So let's break it down for people in terms of what it comes in and exactly how it works. So I'm a business. I've realised, hey, I could put this blockchain into simplify this process that we currently have that's spanning multiple intermediaries within our organisation. And so great, we've got this blockchain, we've got some smart contracts or decentralised apps, whatever flavour, running on top of it, but that's obviously not enough. So how does Firefly come into that, and what additional value add does it have if you start with this blockchain application focusing on a business problem that it's solving?
So first thing is this concept of a multi-party system. That's what you're trying to build. You think about what you're trying to build is different to if you're building it on a database centralized. What makes it different? And the thing that makes it different is everybody's going to be running their own copy of the application. That's what makes it different. So if everybody's going to be running their own copy of the application is going to be integrated with a security system. It's going to be nice and have a beautiful user experience, mobile, web, etc. And it's going to be responsive. You're going to have a whole stack of tech that each individual organization needs to run, customize, and integrate to their stuff. So, what's that stack going to be? That's where Firefly fits in. Firefly comes and says, here's a starting point for that stack that you can build on top of. Here's a starting point that integrates with a whole range of backend technologies. So behind the Firefly API, which is REST, designed for developers who work in modern languages, full stack developers who live in React and TypeScript backends, right? Or enterprise developers who are used to REST APIs and building Spring Boot microservices, right? Here's a stack that you can build on top of, and you can plug in behind. So choose your blockchain ecosystem. Find the one that's got the best enterprise tech for you. Can be Ethereum, can be Fabric, can be Corda. Those are the top three at the moment, so that's where the focus is for Firefly. Choose how you're going to connect together the pipes between the organizations, right? They're going to need private exchange as well. Choose the right tech for that. Maybe, we hope, come to an organization like Kaleido that's got all of those pipes pre-built. Or Firefly's got those pipes built in as well and the plug points to add additional pipes. So whether that's direct, HTTP to HTTP, mutual TLS, or that's messaging technologies with the reliability and the end-to-end encryption, and just sort of take those off the shelf and have a set of Lego bricks that let you do the blockchain pieces, the multi-party communication pieces, and then build your app on top. And the HA model should fit into the way that you build your application. The database model should fit into the way that you build your application. This component should just sort of fit with the way that you would have built the application before. You don't have to build your application differently. Apart from, you just need to think about the fact your application is going to be running multiple copies, and everyone's going to have their own copy of it. So sometimes you need to think about what's data shared. You need to think about, which usually is going to be most of it's going to be privately shared. That's just the reality, right? What data is completely shared, open to everybody, and then how is the communication going to happen, and how is that communication going to be different because you can share these pieces of information, the sequence of events. What's going to make it different? That's kind of the recipe that Firefly's there to try and make 10 to 100 times easier than we've seen it be in the past. That's the goal of Firefly.
And then I guess to complement that as well, you've got the usual widgets like nice UIs for monitoring it and these sorts of pieces too.
Yeah. So the intention here is this isn't a dump of the piece of bits that we've had. This is we've done a huge amount of engineering since design of Firefly. It's actually a new generation of the core technology. We rebuilt it in Go. We built the Explorer, the Firefly Explorer from scratch on top of it to give that sort of live modern experience people expect from a great technology, because that's what we know all the open source projects that we love do. So we want this community to be the place where kind of that kind of innovation can happen. So we've seeded it with lots of components, not just the sort of core plumbing pieces, but with a command line. So you can have it running in 30 seconds on your laptop. You can have a full stack with 3 members simulated and be running with the REST APIs. You've got full Open API 3 Swagger for all of the stuff just there. Like that's as important for this project as how fast and clever the internals are, which of course is also a big focus. Right, when you're dealing with privacy, you have to think about what are you leaking. and there is a lot of plumbing inside of there that's about coordination of events on-chain and off-chain, because that's a really hard problem that the individual components can't solve. And a lot that focuses on what's the right model for privacy in these organizations. So there's heavy lifting code in there as well as the orchestration pieces.
And so the project's just been, I guess it's been donated to Hyperledger from a governance perspective and so on. And at the moment it's in its sort of, I guess, incubation stage, because it's a new project there, and then as you know, traction grows around it, it'll move out of that. What are kind of the, there's hope, you know, there should be people listening to this as well who are technically inclined and interested to find out, you know, about getting involved in the project. What are kind of the things you want people to do with it, apart from like try it out, see if there's the potential to use it in their current projects? You know, what would be your ideal ask for people who come across the project beyond that?
So that ask is really strong. Trying to use it, seeing if it does make the problem you're trying to solve easier, if it helps you understand the problem that you're trying to solve as well. I think that's really important. We want that engagement. Come along to the community calls. They're weekly at the moment. They'll fall back to bi-weekly once I think we've got through lots of architecture playbacks on what's there at the moment. But at the moment, those are weekly, so you can come along. We try and make sure that only the first half is sort of a deep dive presentation, and the second half is just completely open to discuss, to bring your ideas. So come with your ideas, come with your skepticism as well, and let's talk. Like let's talk through. And then because it's about pluggable components, there's lots of opportunity beyond just working on the core of Firefly to work on plugging in technologies. So the fact that it's multi-protocol means the Ethereum leg is very mature. The Fabric leg is actually really in the innovation stage at the moment, and Jim Zhang, another of my co-founders here, who's worked on Fabric since the beginning, is helping coordinate the efforts in that space. So that's nascent, and there's lots of opportunity to get stuck in. And there's lots of enterprise innovation there, so you can get really stuck in on the engineering side there, and the Corda one as well, where we've actually had some previous proofs with real projects. There's some more innovation needed to make it fit the whole model, because Corda is slightly different as a technology to the other blockchains. So that's a whole area of sort of plugging in technologies. But there's also other technologies that can plug in the ARM blockchain. Like we've got IPFS and we've got private data exchange over mutual TLS. But you know, plug in your own messaging, plug in a messaging technology. And adding building blocks. And then one other thread which is going on at the moment, which is really active, and we think there's lots of innovation for, is tokens. In terms of building blocks, the sort of air and water of building an application, tokens, and how those sort of core operations of tokens, which I feel like a sort of crud for databases, tokens are for blockchain. You know, those corporations, how those fit with the orchestration that needs to happen off-chain. That's something that's really happening actively on the project. So there's loads of places that you almost certainly have skills that would fit in to the model that we're trying to enable with Firefly. And there's kind of, it's not just about blockchain skills, is a really, really important thing. So the community is one where probably everyone who's an engineer has something they could bring to the community that the community would benefit from.
And I guess the other thing just to highlight as well is that there's no fee or anything to take part in. It's completely open to all the actual community there. You don't need to be a Hyperledger member or anything like that to engage with it and contribute to the project.
Absolutely, it's all Apache 2 open source, so it's a genuinely open community. Everything that we do is in the public, and I would encourage, like, the best place to get started. You can come to Kaleido, click open source and go to the Firefly section to learn a little bit about the background and our seeding of it. And then just go directly to the Hyperledger Labs / Firefly Git repo. And you'll get to all of the open documentation and what the actual source code repositories. There's actually a bunch of them because it's sort of that umbrella project with components underneath it and the plugin interface. They all start from Hyperledger Labs / Firefly on GitHub, and that's where all of the open collaboration happens.
So apart from Firefly and just governing and growing and just making it better and better, are you focusing on anything else right now? Is there some other things that that Kaleido as an organisation are working on that you wanted to highlight, or kind of future directions?
Yeah, it really is just one of the things that we're doing over here. I guess a lot of our focus as an organisation is on helping these unsung heroes of the blockchain space, the network operators, the organisations that form either by donations of lots of large enterprises into sort of like a group of people, or actually as a separate organisation. And we are working with, a lot of our time is actually spent just working with those network operators, with the business networks themselves, to accelerate them, to build use cases. And for that reason, we've done a lot of innovation around the model, the technical model for how a network manages infrastructure. And it's really interesting because it's not just the blockchain components. We talked about there's the application components as well. So one of the biggest things that we've actually been working on over the last I guess year is that evolved model for how a network manages building an application together, all the way from building and then hosting all the components. So that's from a technical side. That's a big focus for us, which is around sort of hosting management, network operations, beyond just the blockchain itself, and obviously actually helping organisations, groups of organisations, usually with a network operator, but not always, to actually deliver value. That's the other piece. So a lot of our time is actually spent, building applications and helping accelerate projects.
Awesome. So just before we wrap up, I know you've spoken about how people can follow what's happening with Firefly. Is there, if anyone wants to reach out to you, what are the best places to find you? Is it Twitter, LinkedIn, or via the community calls? What would you encourage?
So a couple of ways. If it's about Firefly, then Rocket Chat is the way to go. Chat.hyperledger.org. You can get us individually. You can get me directly on there. There's a Firefly channel that you can go and engage with the community there. So that Rocket Chat is great. For me personally, LinkedIn is probably a great way to get hold of me, and I love to have DMs on there. Or reach out to me at peter.broadhurst@kaleido.io directly if you want to email me.
Cool, awesome. Well, thank you, Peter. It's been really great to catch up and also learn about Firefly as well. It sounds like it's something that's been missing from the ecosystem, and so it's a big step forward in terms of enterprise and blockchain.
Well, thanks so much, Conor, for inviting me. It's always great to catch up. I know we've been working together for a number of years now, and what you and Web3 Labs do for the community as a whole is fantastic. So thanks for having initiatives like this and ways for people to sort of share and engage together on these interesting topics.
Well, thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Cheers.